Test, test, test. Okay, I think I'm live. So I'm making a little video for people on the entrance of Saturn into Capricorn, which is happening right around the solstice, coming up pretty quickly here. I've decided, I think I mentioned this, in some people might have seen that I did some live feeds a few months ago, and kind of have been meaning to do more video blogging and ever since the solar eclipse. And so this video is kind of part of my experimenting, continuing to experiment with video blogging. And we'll see, see what the new year holds. At any rate, so I have a few things to mention on my little list here. My normal, if you guys read my horoscopes, you know I like bullet points. When Saturn enters its own sign, which is going to happen, as I said, pretty soon, it's going to be coming home for the first time in a full Saturn cycle, which can be up to 30 years. It's a very long time for Saturn to be sort of sojourning around the zodiac. And what makes it really interesting is that Saturn's naturally associated with outcasts. Not a lot of people know that, but Saturn's natural position in the zodiac is in opposition to both of the lights. So Capricorn is opposite the moon sign of Cancer, and Aquarius, Saturn's other sign, is opposite the sun sign of Leo. So we have Saturn as the natural oppositional planet to the lights. And the opposition in astrology, we say, is of the nature of Saturn, because Saturn rules, Saturn is the planet associated with the opposition to the lights. And if you look at the Thema Mundi, which is this old kind of teaching chart that Hellenistic astrologers used, and you follow the aspects to the sun and the moon going out from Leo to the right of the sun in the Thema Mundi, and to the left of the moon in the Thema Mundi, you have, for example, the sextiles to the sun on the right and to the sextile to the moon on the left are both Venus-ruled signs, Libra for Leo and Taurus for Cancer. So the sextiles of the nature of Venus. If you go out to the squares, you get to Aries for the moon, and you get to Scorpio for the sun. So those are the Mars-ruled signs. They're of the nature of Mars. You get out to the trines, you get to Jupiter, and when you get to the oppositions to the lights, you get to Saturn. So the opposition is of the nature of Saturn. So in modern astrology, we associate Uranus as a rebel and kind of like the marginalized one, or the activist, and things like that. And we associate it with Aquarius. It's a pretty good archetypal association, even though I don't personally use rulerships with the outer planets. I love the outer planets. I just don't use them as rulers of the signs. But it's a good association because Saturn's traditional rulership of Aquarius really does fit for the theme of an outsider. Saturn is traditionally associated with melancholics, and melancholy is described by Hippocrates, an old kind of Greek thinker, as something that is people who suffer from melancholy are people who have experience excessive fear and disturbances and sort of like worries and kind of a darkness that might hang over them for an excessive period of time. So you have melancholy associated with Saturn, and the melancholic temperament is associated with Saturn. Ficino, who is a Renaissance philosopher and astrologer, also wrote a lot about how astrologers themselves are often sort of children of Saturn, because we're frequently outcast. I've seen some conversations this week in the astrological community, really almost like anticipating, Saturn coming back home to its own sign. I've seen people talking about who's the real astrologer and who are the outcasts and things like these. Are good conversations for Saturn coming back to its home sign. And we don't always think about Saturn as what's marginalized, but Saturn is the farthest planet out, and in contrast to the lights, it represents darkness. And darkness is a symbol for that which is marginalized. It's not just evil. It's not just some kind of, lack of virtue or character. Like a lot of the times in spirituality, we think of darkness and we think of something that's, contrary to the light, which is good. That's what you want, is the light. The darkness is also soul, soul. Think of being a soulful person in this world. It's not easy. And, because to be soulful, we have to discover something that's sort of metaphorically dark and deep, and it's not easy to access. It's not easy to see. It's not easy to describe or quantify. And that's soulfulness. And we don't often talk about Saturn in relationship to the soul. We're always talking about boundaries and limits and restrictions and things like that. But Saturn is actually a deeply soulful planet. It refers to the darkness. In alchemy, Saturn was related to what was called the nigredo. And the nigredo is like a very deep, dark, kind of blackening state in the alchemical process. But it's related to a very special kind of sort of like a special kind of enlightenment. James Hillman wrote a lot about this as an archetypal psychologist. He liked to write about the psychology of alchemy. And he said that the nigredo, kind of getting into the darkest of the dark, you come up against the utter limits of things. For example, the Buddha, whose very first, in some ways very first and primary teaching is that all is suffering. Or in many ways, the first noble truth of all moksha or soul liberation traditions is the reality of suffering. And when you come into contact with that, paradoxically, it's actually really, really liberating, and it can be intensely blissful, but it's not blissful in this sort of light, happy, superficial way. It's no diss to the light at all, but it's a kind of enlightenment and joy that has gravity to it. It knows pain has moved through the crucible of pain, and that's Saturn. So Saturn is a soulful planet that represents the darkness, and often what is dark and what is soulful is marginalized. And as we're on the cusp of watching Saturn come home into its own sign, in some ways, we're seeing things come out of the shadows. Like things are coming, like crawling out of the shadows. A lot of people have been talking about Jupiter and Scorpio for the sexual, the sort of the Me Too movement, and calling people out who are in power. And I'm totally down with that. I think that's a pretty good archetypal, Jupiter, the empowerment. It's a very feminine sign. It's a Mars sign. It's a kind of empowering the wisdom of women. I think it was Angela Merkel was elected for the first time last time Jupiter was in Scorpio. There's a lot of female, women empowerment kind of stuff with Jupiter and Scorpio. But I also like the kind of return of the marginalized planet to its own feminine sign, and when it returns to Capricorn, it's as though that which has been in the dark is coming back to its home turf, and it's a feminine kind of coming home. It's a coming home that is soulful, where you feel kind of in your power, in your own element, and that which might be against the status quo is suddenly more comfortable, more natural, more obvious. Of course, all of these people should resign, and of course, women should be calling out, people who are jerks, or of course, we have I'm in my Facebook feed, I've been seeing cult leaders, all sorts of interesting, weird posts about cult leaders, crawling out of the woodworks. And while that is definitely, also could be related to Jupiter and Scorpio, there's something about any kind of marginalized person coming into power, for good or bad, that is a part of Saturn returning into its home sign. So you just have to, you kind of have to think about that. There's some other really good things to think about so you can think about my first sort of bullet point would be, think about, that which is marginalized, that which is soulful, that which is deep, and that which is dark, coming home, coming back into a powerful place. It's also important to know what's going on during the Capricorn season, the solar archetype. At the Capricorn time of year, now you have to just kind of be you have to allow the fact that Capricorn is we talk about the zodiac from the perspective of the Northern Hemisphere, but if it's a divination language, it's a symbolic language. It doesn't have to be, it's not literal. It's so, that's why you can tap into all different kinds of divinatory languages from all over the world. The orientation of an Aborigine, divination system based on the stars in Australia could work for me, so long as I participate in its orientation, right? That's what really makes divination, is the willingness of the soul to enter into the framework of the diviner. And this divination tradition, is coming from the Northern Hemisphere. So from that perspective, when you're looking at Capricorn, what you're looking at is the pivoting of the sun around the winter solstice, and it's now the light will start to gain every day, right? So it's going to be heading back toward the longest day of the year, which is the summer solstice. So it's beginning its ascent, but it's still in the dark half of the year. It's from Libra all the way up to Aries. We're in the dark half of the year. There's more darkness than light in the 24-hour day. But at this pivotal turning point, the light starts to return. So the sun, in a sense, has its eyes set on the summer solstice now. And the summer solstice point takes the sun closest to the pole star. So every day, the arc of the sun in the sky is rising up and up and up and up. And as it goes up, it's not only just getting to the highest point in the sky, but it's starting to arch back from deep south in the sky to the north. So it's moving toward the pole star, the North Pole Star, which is unchanging center. It's kind of a metaphor for spirit or enlightenment, or also just it can be a symbol for goal orientation, moving toward an unfixed, an unchanging target with fixed intention. That is a symbol that when the sun is in Capricorn, it starts to move back toward that unchanging pole star. That's a symbol for goal orientation. That could be a spiritual goal. It could, enlightenment, moving toward the pole star as a kind of spiritual metaphor. But frankly, it's also, we are driven by spirits all the time. And the nature of spirit in general is to move us with single-pointed focus towards some kind of bullseye, right? So the light is not just a symbol, again, for enlightenment, but it's also a symbol for spirit. And spirit is just as capable of propelling Donald Trump to want to be the best person, the best businessman, the best everything ever, as well as propelling the yogi to meditate, until he finds God or she finds the goddess in a sort of constantly pursuing the divine. So you have this really beautiful, this sort of beautiful metaphor at Capricorn time of year, where you're thinking of goal orientation, long, far off goal orientation. Now, Capricorn, starting at the base of the solar year, in an earth sign, is really starting at in some ways, the deepest place of materialization. So the darkness as a symbol for like the, material matter. Well, either that means that you're starting from the foundation of building something, part of your ambition, let's say in the material sense, like you want to earn a lot of money, or you want to be powerful, you want to build a skyscraper or an empire. You're starting from ground zero. You're starting from the bare, cold, hard ground, and you're working your way upward. So Capricorn in that sense can be ambitious, greedy, opportunistic, power hungry, driven, and relentless, And so there's that, that sort of spirit is going to be very powerful for many people. And it can be, it's a part, I deal with it all the time. Like I want to be, I want more people to read my work and, there's more likes today. And, it's like, and I have a Capricorn moon, so I'm very familiar with like, trying to build the little empire, so that's the deal with Capricorn. You kind of constantly have to check ourselves. We have to check ourselves and what our desires are. Are we craving the fruit of our work, or are we dedicating our work to something bigger? Are we responding to a calling? Are we following in the footsteps of like a noble or virtuous calling of which we are unattached to the fruits? that we do something because it fills us with a sense of it being worthwhile and good. And that's, I can't define that for everybody or anything, but that's Capricorn sort of at its best. It's goal oriented, but it's not attached to the fruits. It has a kind of a cynical realism about what fruits can actually give you. Like, I'll build all of this stuff and then I'll die. But it's going to be fun. I'm going to do it. And that's Capricorn. Like that can be Capricorn. That the realism of Capricorn can be a kind of unattached form of spiritual ambition, to follow a calling, to follow it through, to go all the way, to carry the cross all the way. And not because of what it gets you, not because it provides you with salvation, but just because that's the adventure that you're dialed into. And that's what feeds your soul. That's that's Capricorn as well. We don't think of that often because we just, a lot of times you think of Capricorn, you just think, super ambitious and hardworking and whatever, but that's a part of Capricorn as well. So this idea of having a goal or a trajectory that you're on, and then, following it through from ground zero all the way up, from a place of materialization all the way up. Now, a lot of the times material as we think of darkness and materiality, you think of the metaphor. You also think of that which is ensnaring and entrapping. The body is not always a comfortable place for the spirit or the soul to occupy. The material world is not an easy place. Most of us, there was an interesting survey that was done. I read this study. I don't remember where it came from, so I apologize. But it said that the most common words that people used when breathing their last breath were swear words. I was so interested to hear that. I was like, wow, that's a little disturbing and kind of funny. But then there was it was part of a documentary that I was watching called Yoga, the Architecture of Peace. It was done by a photographer who photographed yogis and had a lifelong kind of passion for photography. And it's a really interesting movie. Anyway, in the film, he was talking to this yogi about why that was, if I remember correctly, and he sort of commented that it's because most people are unprepared for death. Most people are unprepared for letting go of the body. Most people are really afraid of letting go of the body and really afraid of death, even if they don't live with a really conscious awareness of being afraid of death. So what does that have to do with Capricorn? Because not only does Capricorn start at the base of the solar year and that darkest point, which could be seen as like a foundation, but often when we have a goal in mind, a long, far off goal, oftentimes the goal grows out of the dark, excuse my language, but the dark shit, the stuff, the mess, the stuff that has us entrapped and bound and held in. And so Capricorns are also not just sort of goal-oriented and practical, but they're deeply aware of what it means to move toward a goal from the starting point of being deeply enmeshed in a place that feels limited. So it's not we can't just think of Capricorn as limiting, but also as ambition that begins with a familiarity with being entrapped. And that's a part of our spiritual situations in many mystical traditions. And it's also a part of, every day, like trying to build something, like I'll never forget when my daughter came home from the hospital, right? My daughter came home from the hospital. We brought her home and it was like, I looked at the house and I was just like, I'm a goner. Like, like this is going to be really freaking hard. Because I just suddenly realized like all of the time that I used to have, and now I'm bound up to the care and concern and and fear and love for this being, and that's the kind of like it was Winter Solstice. She was born on the 14th of December, like right at the Winter Solstice, and it was just this very like comical, like Parent Trap, just like. So at any rate, those are some stories. There are two other things that I want to talk about, and then I'll close it down. One is disciplic succession. Capricorn also has part of the work of climbing the mountain. You know, I always talk about climbing the mountain with Capricorn. There is an emphasis on disciplic succession with Capricorn and with Saturn generally. And people, you know, understandably, people are like, disciplic succession, screw that. You know, I don't want any guru. I don't want any authority. If you see the Buddha, kill him. Like we're so, in some ways, we're so anti-authority these days, right? And again, understandably. However, like if you're doing anything, whether you're learning carpentry or you're learning astrology or you're, you know, studying to be a midwife, anything that you could want to do in this world requires, you know, not taking orders from somebody, but spending time with people who are masterful at what they do. And there's no one size fits all standard for what mastery is or looks like. And that's where it gets really tricky and very easy to dismiss the concept of authority altogether. But there is such a thing as people who have authority in what they do. Spirit has confirmed them on their path. You know it when you see it because you spend time with them. They're kind, they're patient, but they're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna blow smoke up your ass if you don't quite know what you're doing yet. Or they're not gonna placate you or try to make you feel really good if they're trying to help you grow and become better at something or learn and grow as a person. So it's like, think of a wise grandmother or a wise grandfather. And this idea of the authority that can support and nourish the journey toward the goal of becoming something, becoming better at something. I think we sometimes mistake like the sort of egalitarian, compassionate spirit, which is good on a spiritual level, with things on a material level. So on a spiritual level, like think of democracy. In democracy, we're all, you know, the rights of a democratic nation, like ours in the United States anyway, in theory is good because it sees us as all created equal in the eyes of the divine. So because we're all equal, we have equal rights, you know, in the law. We have equal rights because we're all equal on a spiritual level. And that is so true. But on a material level, that's anything but true. When we're born, some of us are born really fast. Some of us can't run very fast at all. Some of us are really, really book smart. Some of us, we can't ever really wrap our heads around the super intellectual stuff. You know, so everybody's born into unique, different circumstances. And it's unfortunately in this world, there's a lot of unfairness that comes along with that. Not everyone has to work as hard to be good at some things as others do. Not everybody can do anything that they want to do. And there's a lot of unfairness and cruelty and injustice in the world, right? So we're dealing with all of that. And we cling, I think, rightly to the fact that we are all equal spiritually as a way of combating unfairness, cruelty, injustice, marginalization of people, as you know, as we should. But sometimes that goes too far in the other direction, and we end up undercutting the ability of people in an unequal terrain. The earth is not even, right? Spiritual things, there's a sort of perfect mathematical equilibrium. There's like a perfectly geometric figure of a circle that we're all united by, right? But the earth is uneven. You know, and Capricorn starts this long ascent from uneven ground. And so the scales, if you think of the scales of the solar year, one is tipped all the way down into the darkness and the light's all the way up here. And gradually that scale is going to shift and change in the opposite direction. And in so many different areas in life, the only way to really progress in the material sense at your dharma, at your duty, at your destiny, at whatever you're called to do, is through finding people who have walked that path before and, you know, studying them. You become your own person, but in some ways we desperately lack elders. We talk a lot about the need for feminine enlightenment right now, and that's so true. But actually, one of the deepest and oldest earthy things that is common to so many indigenous traditions is elders. People who know what they're doing, who have done it before. That's actually really, really feminine. It's not, when it's patriarchal and it's perverted, it's just about people, you know, developing cults of personality and big followings and all of that, then of course that's not it. That's corruption. But when we actually have elders, you know, and I think for myself as an astrologer, like one of my favorite two elders are Demetra George and Stephen Forrest. They're two people that, like, I know if I sit down and I read, if I listen to what they're doing, if I watch how they carry themselves at conferences, and I've had readings with both of them, they're two people in my field that I've been able to look up to, you know, and there's many others too, right? I could list a whole ton of people that have really influenced me and been important, but finding those people is a part of Saturn entering Capricorn, because you're coming back home into the sign of the elder. But you're also rooting out false authority in Capricorn, especially since Pluto's in Capricorn right now as well, right? So we're going to be, you know, sort of exploring what authority really means and what it means to have a real elder and a real teacher, what it means to be experienced and be able to speak with authority. Speaking with authority is something that is primarily granted to you by experience and by, you know, soul wisdom. And that's different. There's no way of qualifying that, you know? So, but being able to feel that, being able to sense that, that's also deeply feminine. That's also, you know, being able to intuit and understand when someone is a wise person, is worthy of trust, is worthy of, you can be taught by them. It's also, you know, we have another thing that's not really a part of like ancient earthy elder traditions, and that's the competition between teachers, right? So elders work as a group, you know, in ancient, you know, societies, when there's a more communal tribal feeling, elders all have a responsibility together to work together to educate younger people. And that's a part of also younger like every generation going sort of down to the younger ones has the responsibility of doing that. So that's something that I kind of am expecting to see that will be a big topic. And also the rage, the understandable rage and difficulty with elders and authority, and with, you know, the trouble with aging, the challenge of aging, and the challenge of aging people not being recognized by younger people, or of older people who think that just because they're old means they're an elder, and that's also not true, right? So all these different issues that can come up with disciplic succession. Then the last one that I wanted to cover is just that spiritual life requires work. Sometimes we also make the mistake of thinking that just because we know we're a spirit soul, we know we have a spirit, or that we're, you know, that's it, you know, that talking about it or knowing it, or, you know, reading some Rumi when we have like a nice yoga class, or, you know, something like that, like that's enough. And on some level it is, right? On some level, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to become. There's nowhere to go. It's like all the striving, it's like all the ambition, and spiritual ambition is a real potential pitfall as well. But spiritual life also requires work, and being held accountable is a part of Saturn moving into Capricorn, I think, because again, we have an earth sign that's aspirational. So we have the practical measured against the ideal. And when that comes together, we're really looking at like, well, you know, what, am I who I say I am? You know, am I practicing what I preach? And if I'm not, and I'm held accountable, can I take that as an opportunity, not as an insult to my pride, but as a calling to come back home? You know, so taking responsibility, but being able to be held accountable and being overjoyed at the opportunity to be held accountable. That's real courage, in my opinion, with Saturn and Capricorn. So those are, and I say that as someone, you know, who I struggle to be held accountable, you know, like I'm going through a yoga teacher training program and taught for like 5 years. So I decided to recertify myself. I'm going through a 500-hour training with a teacher here in the DC area. And I'm also going through our own yoga studios teacher training program, right? So I'm like, like I walk around like I own the place, like because I do, but I'm also taking the yoga teacher training program right now and trying to kind of like rekindle my life as a yoga teacher. And it's very humbling. It's humbling to have my wife in front of a group of people who are like, my clientele or whatever. They're like, you're really not like teaching this correctly. And, you like whatever, these are the character issues that you should work on as a yoga teacher, and or the technical issues or whatever. I dread it. I just like inside, I just clench up and I'm like, no, I'm a really good astrologer. So I've got to pass, like, and I'm not even that great of an astrologer, especially not compared to my heroes. So whatever. But at any rate, so you guys get it. I think that we'll be held accountable as well in our spiritual homework that we're here to do. So at any rate, that just about concludes it. I wanted to read you guys a story from the Uddhava Gita, which is Krishna's final teachings. And it's about work, and it's about staying aware of the darkness, staying not falling asleep in the world, but being aware of the darkness and the potential to get lost in the material world, and to not keep our eyes set on the prize, which is spiritual life, spiritual consciousness. So this is a story that I'll read you. From the gentle dove I learned of the pain that follows obsessive attachment, the great torment it brings, and how that torment unbalances the mind. A dove built a nest in a tree in the forest, and there he lived with his beloved for many years. Their loving hearts became bound one to another, just as their bodies were bound together in love. They lived in perfect harmony, always seeing eye to eye, each intent on the other. They ate, talked, played, and slept together, there in their home deep in the forest. Whatever his mate desired, O king, this dove would strive to bring her, no matter how difficult, for in all things she pleased him greatly. As time passed, the female dove laid her first eggs in their nest, while her partner watched over her. At the proper time, and fashioned by that inconceivable self, fledglings with delicate limbs covered by soft down emerged from their shells. The parents took great delight in their offspring. They loved the gentle cooing and chirping of their children, and showed them every affection a parent can. They rejoiced to watch their children at play, to see their first cautious attempts at flight, and they loved their soft, sweet wings and their gentle song. These two, completely content with their nest and their new family, and charmed by this illusion, gave no thought to anything else beyond the world that they already knew. One day, as good parents, they left their nest for the entire day, seeking out the best food to bring home to their family. But on that day, a fowler entered the forest and happened on the dove's nest. Seeing the young birds at play, he threw his net and seized them all. The parents returned by and by, eager to give their young the tidbits they had sought out just for them. The mother dove, seeing her young captured and in distress, flew to them weeping. Rushing to her children, distracted by grief, and tied to them by love born of illusion, she herself became entangled in the net. The father dove, seeing both his children and his beloved partner caught in that cruel net, broke down in tears. "Oh no," he wailed. "Behold my ruin. I was a fool to let this happen, this destruction of my family that was the source of my virtue, my wealth, my fulfillment. My beloved wife, to whom I was everything, is now going to heaven with our sweet children, leaving me here alone. My life has lost its purpose. I no longer wish to live in this empty nest, alone and miserable. What is there left to live for?" Unable to bear seeing his family dying and snared in that net, the dove flew down to them and was himself captured. The ruthless fowler, having trapped the dove, who was a devoted husband and father, along with the mother and her children, tied them up and went home. Like the dove of my story, anyone who becomes so attached to those things that feed the senses, who fails to see that which is beyond both joys and sorrows, will come to the same end. We have to soar high. To attain this precious human birth, which is like an open door to liberation, we must not act like the dove and fail to look towards that which is beyond our home and family. This is a dark teaching, right? When I first read it, it was like, wow, that's so heavy, you know, especially as someone who has a wife and family. And, you know, it's like, what are you telling me to like ditch my kid, ditch my wife? Like, like that's heavy. But I don't see it that way, especially not when I know the context of Krishna's teachings, which is not about running away to caves and meditating. And it's not about, you know, who's the level 10 renunciate. It's about, but it is about whatever you're doing. If you have a family, if you have kids, if you're trying to work your way up in the world, if you're, you know, whatever projects you're working on, all the things that we're going to get really ambitious about potentially with Saturn moving into Capricorn. The message of that story is don't lose sight of your eternal soul, because eventually all of these goals and all of these projects, every empire will fall. Even the Earth and the solar system will someday fall. And so if we build our castles on attachment to these things too intensely, right? It's like building a castle, a sandcastle, and the waves will come and wash it away eventually. This is something that is a deep part of the kind of allegorical symbolism of Capricorn, who's a sea goat and is here to build things, but is starting from the darkest place that is in some ways the place of ruin, entrapment in the material world, and entanglement, the place of having nothing, of bleakness, of death. And so whatever we strive for with Saturn entering in Capricorn, the spiritual work that we have to do throughout it is to walk that path, however ambitious it might be, without being attached to the fruits of our labors. And that's really difficult. That's not easy to do. But I do believe that that's part of the inherent challenge of Saturn moving into Capricorn. Now, of course, I'm speaking from my own study and beliefs in yoga philosophy. So, you know, if yoga philosophy isn't your thing, I understand. So, but that's it. Thank you all for listening. I hope to do this more often in the new year. I'll just be trying to video blog a little bit more often about the transits and get over my fear of being on camera. So thanks a lot, everybody. Good night.